talking rather than the camera where I was supposed to be, because whoever was asking the questions was someplace else.
How many veterans have you talked to?
Oh, about 100 in the past year.
Oh, really?
Most of them World War II, some Vietnam and Korea, and a few other stray things. Even a former student of mine who was a volunteer building a dental clinic in Afghanistan. Because the Library of Congress project covers every conflict we've been involved in that has anybody left to tell a story about. So when they first started in 2000, they actually had a couple World War I veterans. Obviously not many, but a lot of it was done that started really to get the World War II stuff going.
So you do a lot more Vietnam people than World War II.
Other way around. I mean, we're really trying to catch up with the World War II people first, and Vietnam people will, they'll last a little longer.
Yeah, well, they should.
The older ones, I mean, they're getting in their 70s too.
I'll be 87 this year, so yeah.
Wow. But the Korean War guys, you stop and think about it, they're 79, 80, that kind of thing too. They're not exactly young.
We're rolling, so whenever you're ready, just look to that camera and begin.
We're talking today with Mr. Les Shoemaker of Kentwood, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of Grand Valley State University. Mr. Shoemaker, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself? For instance, where were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, I was born on November 11, 1921 in Grandville, Michigan.
And did you then live there when you were a kid?
Well, I lived there, well, let's see, we stayed there. I finished the second grade, and then we moved close to town well, they call it the Galewood-Urbandale area, just near Clyde Park and Burton Street. And I started the third grade in Lee School there.
Okay. Now, what did your family do?
My dad was a furnace installer, and my mother was a homemaker.
Okay. And did your father manage to keep his job through the 30s?
Well, it was pretty tough because there weren't many homes being built in those days. The Depression started about actually the banks closed down in 29 October, I believe it was, and things didn't really improve till about 1939, 1940.
And so, did he have to do extra work to get by, or?
Well, there was no extra work. I mean, you didn't get a second job because it was hard to even get a first job. So it was tough. We managed, but it was slim pickings.
Now, did you finish high school?
Oh, yeah, I finished high school at Lee School, graduated in 1939.
Okay. And what did you do after that?
Well, looking for a job. The first job I had was at Winters and Crampton in Grandville as a they made handles for stoves and refrigerators. I was an inspector there.
And did that pay decently, or was that?
Well, enough to. In those days, it was sufficient to get a car, and I still lived at home at that time.
Right. Now, kind of there in 1939, 1940, I mean, before Pearl Harbor, were you paying much attention to what was going on in the world?
Well, quite a bit, because in school every Friday afternoon we had an hour of current events, and we knew that things were not going well. In 1939, just before I graduated, Poland was being invaded, and Germany was just running all over Europe at that time.
Yeah, and then once you kind of left school, did you continue to read the newspapers or listen to the radio and pay attention to stuff?
Oh yeah, I was very concerned about what was going on because it did not look good at all.
Did you figure that sooner or later this country was going to get caught up in that?
Oh yeah, it just one step after another, and it just came closer and closer all the time, and finally it got to a point where we had to enter the war.
Okay.
Two switches.
Actually, they are both on.
Yeah, okay.
We have to start over.
Do we need to start over?
You don't, just continue.
Okay. Edit that part out. All right. Now, do you remember how you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Yeah, I think I was in church on a Sunday afternoon or evening, and I heard that Pearl Harbor was, and well, of course, that was for the Japanese War. Yeah, that was December 7, 1942.
Well, 41.
41. I'm
there
sorry. Yeah.
Okay. And then once that happened, did you consider enlisting, or did you figure they'd catch up with you eventually, or what?
Well, things were a little differently. I got married in July 31st, 1942, and I could see I had a very low draft number, and I knew that it would catch me sooner or later.
Were you remarried after Pearl Harbor or before?
After.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was
Well,
about
you-
6 or 7 months later, yeah. Yeah, so I knew that my low draft number would get me, and it did 2.5 months later, and I got my notice to report.
Okay. And then where did you go to?
Well, first time I went to Fort Custer in Battle Creek, Michigan, yeah.
And what did they do there?
Well, there's mostly an induction center. There was, that's about all it did. You know, thousands of guys went through
Right.
there. And from there, they just send you all over the country.
Okay. Now, did you have any opportunity to select what branch of the service you went into or what kind of duty you would get?
No, it's pretty much left to them. Although when I was given a physical, I was put in limited service, which meant I had a lazy eye that was only, well, it was only about 2,200. So with the limited service, they have a somewhat limited area in which they can put you. You're not going to be supposed to not be infantrymen with a bad eye, but anyway, I ended up almost to that.
Right. Okay. Now, where did they send you then for basic training?
To Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. It's called Fort McCoy now, but it's central upper Wisconsin, yeah.
And what was the basic training experience like?
Well, at that time, it was, when I went up there, it was about December, early December, and every morning for calisthenics, it was about 0 degrees at 6 o'clock in the morning for a half hour of calisthenics, and it was cold and more cold every day.
Right. Now, the guys you were training with, were they from all over the country or mostly the upper Midwest? Or?
Well, mostly up in the Midwest, I would guess, because every state probably, although when they spread all these guys all over the place, so it's hard to say where they came from. But anyway, a lot of people from Fort McCoy, or from Fort Custer, went up to Camp McCoy.
Okay. Now, how were the drill instructors? How do they treat you?
Well, they want to make you into a soldier very fast, and you've got to learn fast. Discipline is the big thing.
And how did you deal with the Army discipline?
Well, you have either, if you're going to be a renegade and not listen to what drill instructors, you know, if you just get into a heap of trouble, and they'll make it miserable for you. So you got to adapt.
Okay. Now, were most of the guys you were in with sort of in that kind of 19, 20-year-old range, or did they?
Yeah, most of them. I was I was 20 years old at the time. Yeah.
Okay. Now, about how long did you stay there?
Basic training, I would guess it was about 8 or 10 weeks. It probably got to be about March of 1940. Let's see. Yeah, and then I was sent back to Fort Custer. They were just starting up a stockade there. There's quite a few guys in the Army that are renegades, and they AWOL, and they had a stockade there for about 100 guys, and they wanted to train people to be an MP there. So I was one of those MPs that we were guarding the stockade there.
All right. Now, what kind of training did they give you to be an MP?
Well, not a great deal, as usual for the Army. They just stick you out. Well, they gave us some training, but mostly it was. But they had guards on the corners, you know, with the shotguns. So, but I didn't do that. I was in the interior most of the time.
Okay. And what duties did you have?
Just watch, make sure that there was everything was under control.
Okay. What sorts of people did they have in the stockade? I mean, who was...
Well, they're mostly AWOLs and guys that you know, would, rather serious crimes. Yeah, they can't send GIs to the public places, you know, prisons. So they have their own system of prisons.
Okay. Now, so I mean, you had people who were committing violent crimes or stealing or...
Well, we don't know just how violent it was when they send these guys in. We never interviewed them. We just had to make sure that everything was under control.
Okay. Now, was that a relatively easy kind of duty or assignment?
Well, it was very easy because we were on about 3 or 4 hours and off about 8 or something like that. I'm not sure about the hours, but anyway, I was within 65 miles of home, and I was married, and I could, if I could combine my duties, I could go home for the weekend and be with my wife. So that wasn't too bad.
Right.
In fact, that's about as good as it gets in the Army.
Now, how long did this setup last?
Well, it lasted until I got a letter from the post commander and said, because of your high IQ test, he said, would you be willing to take another 3-hour test to qualify for the Army Specialized Training Program? So I said I did, and evidently I passed it because they said, well, okay, report to Michigan State University. I guess it was in June or something. I'm not sure just exactly when it was.
Okay. Now, what was the purpose of this program?
They wanted to make all these guys for the engineering program. It was basically engineering, various kinds, mostly mechanical or it could be chemical, whatever. But
Okay. So it's an engineer training program. And so at Michigan State, what did they have you do?
well, this was just kind of to get us into the flow of things. It wasn't the real thing because later on, after about 6 weeks of this, just to get us up to speed, I was sent to Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
So when you say get up to speed, was that just basic math
Well-
and science classes? Or?
Well, yeah, it was just because I had been out of school for a couple of years, and your study habits are somewhat slow. But
Right.
yeah, it was just kind of get things in order.
All right. So then they send you off to Lehigh, and when you got there, what did you do?
Well, we started taking 21 credit hours, and I had a pile of books about 2 feet high, and we had classes from, let's see, we got up at about 6 o'clock in the morning in calisthenics first, and then you ate, and then you cleaned up your beds, get everything ready, and classes are at 8 o'clock, and then classes till 12 o'clock, and eat, and then at 1 o'clock you're back in class again till 5, and so and study till midnight.
All right. Now, what subjects were you studying?
Everything under the sun, mostly a lot of mathematics, calculus, and trigonometry, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Now, and how well did you do in that program?
Well, I stayed in it. I guess I was doing all right, except that I had a sore throat every morning. They sent me because my tonsils were bad. They sent me to Allentown General Hospital, and they kept me there a week because the previous guy had bleeding, and they said, we're going to keep you in the hospital for a week. And I got a little bit behind on my studies because they were cramming us so much. That, but I still managed, yeah.
Okay. Then, how long then did you stay at Lehigh?
Well, the program went on. I was there about a year and a quarter, and then we got a notice that Congress said there's too many guys going to these various colleges. We got about 6 or 8 divisions down south that need thousands of guys. Where shall we get them? We'll get these ASTPers, and we'll put them all in the infantry.
Okay.
And
so where did they send you?
They sent me to Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, and there were 5 Army camps around Alexandria at that time. And the 84th needed 5,000 guys, and they grabbed the first 5,000.
All right. And when you're sent there, what rank and assignment did you have?
Well, all of the division had been in existence for a couple of years, and all the non-commissioned officer places where there was nothing available. They had all the officers and all the non-commissioned officers. So all these ASTPers were privates.
Okay. Now, what unit or what type of unit were you then assigned to?
Well, the 335th Infantry Division Headquarters Company.
Regiment, probably, but
Yeah.
yeah. So headquarters company, and so what kind of duties then did you have?
Well, because of my limited service, evidently, they didn't put me as a rifleman, and which was very fortunate because most of these guys got chopped up later on when we were in combat. But yeah, I was a switchboard operator.
All right. And what kind of actual work did you have to? I mean, as a switchboard operator, who were you connecting or?
Well, to the front lines, in combat, radio is okay except that the enemy can hear you, and so the switchboard, we had radio going to the various battalions and companies and so forth to the front lines, and of course we would connect them to the back.
Right.
So we had 8 little plug-ins. Our switchboard was about, and it was portable. We could, because we had to go from, we'd stay in one place maybe a couple of days and then move out. We were always just behind the front lines.
Right. And you'd have sort of signal corpsmen or whatever who would have to run landlines up
Oh,
to wherever the new
yeah,
battalion command
that was
posts
part of
were.
the wire section. They had a Jeep with a big wire thing on the back that they could string lines. If we couldn't repair the wire, we'd string new ones, yeah.
Right. Okay. Now, what was the environment like there in Louisiana? Just the
Well,
country and everything else.
Not very good. It was in the summertime mostly, and it was hot, it was humid, and we were on bivouac out in the bayous quite often, forced marches at night, 15-mile hikes with your pack on, and we had to contend with armadillos and water moccasins and coral snakes, and you name it, they're all there in Louisiana.
All right. Did any of the men in your company have any close calls with them?
Well, I'd heard that one guy got bit by a coral snake and he died within an hour.
Mm-hmm. All right. Did you get much of a chance to see anything of the local community or the area or go to town or things like that?
My wife came down to Louisiana after I was there a while, and she got a job at the PX with a billing machine. So when I could, I'd go into town and see her. So she was busy with her job, but because I was on bivouac a lot of the weekends, it was kind of tough. But we got to see each other maybe at least once a week. Yeah.
Okay. Now, was she renting a room from someone?
Yeah.
Did she have an apartment?
Yeah, it's just a room. Yeah.
And was just a room from somebody's house? Or?
Yeah, it was the first room we got was $15 a week, and of course I was only making $50 a month. We found that didn't quite hack it, so we got a less expensive room at $8 a week, and that was okay.
In general, how did the people in the community seem to treat the soldiers and their wives?
Oh, well, there's too many of them. When you got 5 divisions around the town, Saturday, in the weekends, it's just chaos there because there's just too many soldiers, and what soldiers do on the weekend when they got some time off, they usually are looking for girls and get drunk. And
Except, of course, the responsible married soldiers like yourself.
Right. It was a little different, yes. So I didn't go. That was not my crowd. I had to go if I could see my wife if I wasn't on bivouac. Yeah.
Okay. Now, how long was it before they shipped you out?
Well, when of course we got about 5,000 those ASTPers, and we got the division filled up, and we had to take more training. I would guess we had another basic training of about 10 or 11 weeks. I'm not sure what it was, but anyway. About early September, we were ready to go overseas.
Okay, so this is now September of '44 then?
Yeah.
After D-Day? Okay. Now, where did you ship out from then?
Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, which is right near, fairly near New York City.
Okay, and what kind of ship were you traveling on?
Well, it was I'm not sure what kind of a ship it was, but anyway, we were forming a convoy. They usually have about 50 ships in a convoy, and it was a foggy night, and an oil tanker cut through our convoy and cut in front of us, and we rammed it in its side and buckled all the plates in the front of our ship.
Wow.
So they said no way we could go across with all the buckled plates. So we went back to New York Harbor, and they took 3 weeks to repair them.
And so then did you join a different convoy?
Next convoy out, we joined, yeah.
Okay. Now, what was the trip across the Atlantic like?
Well, it was interesting to see, as far as you could see these ships, and of course you zigzag all the time. You don't go in a straight line, but the destroyers go around the outside of the convoy, and once in a while they put depth charges just for practice. You could see the water, boil up when those things hit. So, but yeah, it was pretty routine. 11 or 12 days to go across.
Okay. And what was the weather like at that point?
Well, it was pretty good. September, it was not too bad. You could be on board, and take a look outside. It wasn't that bad in September.
And about how many men do you think were on the ship that you were on?
Oh, probably, I don't know, 1,000 or so. We didn't have one of the biggest ships. It was not made for, it was converted something else. I think it was a small liner of some sort. I forgot the name of it.
Okay. And about how many men would be packed together?
Oh, we probably had 1,000 on our ship, something like
And then
that.
how were you, did they accommodate you? Were there
Well, you sleep-
individual rooms or?
No, you sleep on the floor with another guy next to you.
Mhm. And did they have sort of layers of people stacked up? or?
I don't recall, but anyway, it was crowded, very crowded.
Okay. Now, did
If
you
there were any rooms, the officers got
Right.
those.
Okay, so then did you get to spend much time up on deck? To see
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'd go up on deck once in a while, but yeah, most of the time, yeah, not much to do.
Yeah,
Most of the gambling, there was gambling all over the place.
Mhm. All right. Then let's see, where did you land then?
We landed in Glasgow, Scotland.
Mhm. And where did they ship you out from there?
Well, from there, we went down to London by train, and then from London, we went to a camp about 60 or 70 miles from London. I think it was near South Hampton, I'm not sure.
Possible. And basically, was this all just transit? I mean, you were here for a few days and there
Well,
for a few days?
they were trying to get the 84th Infantry together. Of course, being that we were 3 or 4 weeks later, they were waiting for us. The division were just kind of making time. The group that was behind had to get up there, and then they, after got us all together, we were ready to go over the English Channel.
Okay. And then what kind of ship did they put you on to take you over the channel?
It was a landing ship.
Okay, so an LST?
Yeah, you just stand and then wade ashore.
Mm-hmm. But was it like the kind with the doors that opened up out of the front of the ship?
Yeah, it lets down, I think it was. And,
Okay, so
and
that may have been a little bit smaller one, like an LCI or something
yeah.
like that. Yeah. Okay, and do you remember where they landed you? Did they just put you on Omaha Beach? or
Yeah, we went to Omaha Beach, yeah.
Okay.
And there was all these relics that were left over from D-Day all over the place, all rusted relics.
So what kind of relics? I mean,
Well,
vehicles
well,
or-
yeah, the tanks and you know, the landing ships, a lot of them got sunk. So there was, you know, the LSTs and the tanks and
So
all
there was
kinds
still a
of.
lot of stuff there. It hadn't all been cleared off.
Yeah,
at
oh,
that
they
point.
couldn't clear it off, no.
And do you remember when was it that you landed? Sort of like October 44?
Probably,
November?
I would guess, probably around the 2nd of October, somewhere in through there.
Okay. Now then, once you landed, where did they send you next?
Well, our division then went across the English Channel, and then we worked our way through France, probably 3 or 4 days in France, and we went up to the Netherlands. There's a Limburg province is kind of a tail that's on the Netherlands territory, and the town of Heerlen is right there on the German-Dutch border there.
Okay. Now, as far as you can tell, what had been going on in the area before you got there?
Well, they had just cleared they got the Germans back on their side because Heerlen is right on the border, and there's coal mines underneath, and the coal mines run under German territory and also under the Holland territory, and so we had pushed about the time we got there, we were right at the border. Otherwise, previous to that, they had pushed the Germans back to their own border.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then, what was the countryside there like? I mean, what did that part of the Netherlands look like to you?
Well, it's just very productive. It's low, you know, it's a lot of green stuff. There's farming, and it's very fertile soil there.
Mm-hmm. And did you see much of the local population, or?
No, we really didn't have time to. I mean, we had to pay attention to business because every night there was artillery going over our head.
Okay. Now, was there much fighting on the front lines in your sector, or were you just kind of looking at each other?
Well, no, because the fact it was really tough battles there because we were trying to, you know, move forward all the time, and progress, of course, was very slow. If we made a mile in a week, you were doing very well because of all of the, you know, they had these fortifications, they had dragon's teeth and minefields, and you know,
Yeah. So this is sort of the kind of the northern end of the Siegfried Line then?
we were the very northernmost American division. The British were on our left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're confronting sort of the northern end of the Siegfried Line.
Yeah,
the German
right. But it was
fortifications.
very heavily fortified there.
All right. Now, what kind of information were you getting, or how much did you know about what was going on with your division? You're working the switchboard?
Yeah.
Okay, and then Did you just connect people, or were you being given information too?
Well, you pick up bits here and there.
Mm-hmm.
You're not supposed to be listening to the conversations of some of the. One time a general told me he knew for sure I was listening, and he swore at me. But yeah, well, you do pick up. I probably was privy to more information than a lot of people, because all this information flowed through the switchboard.
Right. And how did things seem to be going? I mean, how well was the division
well, we
doing
knew
at that point?
progress was very slow because of it was very heavily fortified, and you know, we'd send out patrols and find out where their strengths and weakness, but it was also heavily fortified that we didn't hit them head on. We were mostly going in a northeasterly direction because we found once we got started that it was better to go sideways than forward.
Now, were you still kind of going through a fortified zone, or were you going to kind of getting around some of the fortifications a little bit?
Well, the fortifications were several miles deep, so and every city too. I mean, as the Germans backed up, they still. This is their homeland. They fought like there was, you know, it was very, very difficult.
Okay. So you're getting up there then, kind of in October, in the fall, a little bit after the Market Garden operation that had taken them up in that direction in the first place. Now, as you kind of get into November and into December, did things stay pretty much the same in your sector?
Well, pretty much. We fought there until, of course, the Battle of the Bulge started on December 20th, but we had several rivers to cross. Well, there was the Ruhr River in there, and of course that was after we got back to that area after the Battle of the Bulge was done. They sent us back up there,
Okay.
but anyway.
Well, tell us a little bit about the Battle of the Bulge. Did they switch your division down south to try to help out?
Yeah, because we were the most northerly American division, it was easy to tell the British to take over our sector.
Right.
And one night, you know, a division is about, what, 16,000, 18,000 men and supplies, and various organizations, field artilleries and so forth that are attached with us. So it's a big, big project to take and move all that equipment overnight.
Now, how quickly after the battle starts down there did they give you the orders to move? And were you moving before Christmas?
Oh yeah, we moved much. We were there. We went overnight, and they said go to the city of Marche, M-A-R-C-H-E. That's in Belgium.
Right.
And the Germans had a kind of a two-pronged attack, and one of their prongs was headed right towards Marseille.
For Marche, the town that you're being sent to.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
M-A-R-C-H-E. I guess they pronounce it Marche.
It's Marche. If they have the accent mark on the end, it's Marche.
It could
otherwise
be.
it's
Could
just
well
Marche.
be. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm a French historian, so I know those things. But Marseille is the port down in the south. But anyway, the town that you're in, yeah. So there's one of the German forces probably a little bit going south, and one of them maybe right in your direction.
Yeah, well, it was coming right in our direction. They said they put us right in the way of the German attack, and of course we got there. They hadn't quite gotten to the town of Marseille when we got there. We probably arrived just a couple hours ahead of them. And so the minute we got there, they were trying to figure out how strong we were, and we were trying to figure out how strong they were. We sent out what we call the I&R patrol. There was about 18 or 20 men. It's called reconnaissance.
Right.
And they were sent out, but they really got chewed up because the Germans had some of our Jeeps, and when we saw our own Jeeps, some of these guys, you know, just got suckered into getting killed. So
Had you been warned about that?
no, nobody knew what was going on. They called the situation fluid, but fluid means that nobody knew anything.
Right. So then basically, so what was your responsibility at this point? Were you just helping to get the switchboard running and make
Well,
connections?
yeah, we would move. Of course, we stayed right in Marseille for quite a while. In fact, almost the whole Battle of the Bulge, because the fighting was all around us. The Germans, when they found after a couple of days that we had a pretty strong fortification there, they went. There were 6 roads that come into Marseille, so it was a very important place, and the Germans wanted it desperately. So they went around us on both sides, and we only had one road left that we could get supplies in. Otherwise, the Germans controlled all of them. Yeah.
And about how long did the situation stay like that? I mean, how long were they going to hold
Probably
on?
4 or 5 days until we knew what they were up to, and we could get our people to control the situation.
Okay. Now, did your own division was your unit kind of counterattacking at that point? Were you going after them, or were there reinforcements coming in to help you, or how was that working?
The problem was when we got there, I think it was 106th, maybe the 99th, these two divisions that were spread very thinly through the Ardennes, they took a real beating, and when the Germans opened their attack on the 20th of December, when they saw all these tanks coming at them, and they had nothing but rifles, they all fled. So everybody was retreating, and of course our division wanted to come to the front. So the roads were all clogged, and they were muddy and snowy, and it was mass confusion because we were in full retreat.
Right, because Marche, I mean, the town that you were defending is a good ways back from where the original front line was.
Well,
but it was right in an area where the Americans had been thinnest, and so that's where the German armored forces are moving.
We were probably about 20 miles from, we were about 15 or 17 miles from Bastogne, of course.
And Bastogne was also pretty well back from where the original front line was.
Yeah.
So in a way, the town that you were in functioned in much the same way that Bastogne did. It was a road junction. The Germans needed it if they were going to move forward. And the only difference was they didn't quite cut you guys off.
No, we got there just hours before they did. And
now, do you have a sense of, now, did they attack your division directly? And were they trying to come right at you, or were they just probing? To see
they were
what you
probing, and they found that, there's this, they've got a lot of men and material here. They found out that they probably should not attack because it would take too much of their strength away. And their biggest problem was they were running out of gasoline for their tanks, and we had all these gasoline depots scattered around that particular area and maybe a little further back. But if they could get those gasoline supplies, they would be all set. But a couple of days after, probably around the 28th of December, somewhere through there, they were pretty well running out of gas, and they had to call it quits.
Right. Now, did your division eventually go over to the offensive? Did you start attacking?
Yeah, we had to be defensive probably for the first week, and then after that, maybe 10 days. And so starting around toward the end of the year, and in fact, we had no overhead support because every day was cloudy and snowy. In fact, the snow sometimes was knee deep, and it was so bitterly cold that so all these guys on the front line were their feet were freezing. So it was a tough situation.
Right. Now, as somebody in headquarters company and working the switchboard and so forth, did you get to be indoors most of the time?
Well, we always looked for a bombed-out basement because we had to have the switchboard has to be secure, and so when we found a basement that was available, we'd get in a corner with our switchboard, and we slept and ate, and that was our world for almost every day. We'd only get out, probably go out if they had a meal coming for us. Other than that, we stayed right there in the basement.
Okay. And do you remember anything about what Christmas was like that year?
Well, we got our first hot meal on Christmas. And of course, we arrived on the 20th. So for 5 days, we didn't have it. We were eating K rations and C rations.
Right. Well, how did they manage to get a hot meal to you?
Well, but this one road that was still available, and evidently they felt that Christmas we should have a hot meal if they could possibly get it there, and they did.
All right. Now, when you get to the very end of the year and you start then to attack and so forth, were you able to push the Germans back, or were you?
Well, it took time to find out who they were and how much strength they had, but little by little we did push them back. And about the same time, when we were going on the offensive, that General Patton was coming up from the south west, and an English group was trying to pinch off the whole Bulge from the north. So little by little, by probably around the 10th or 15th of January, it was pretty much over.
Okay. Now, as you started to advance, did your unit start taking German prisoners? I mean,
Oh yeah, the Belgian people helped us a lot because they were living there, and they would tell us, well, the Germans are strong there. And especially in towns, they'd say, well, they occupy that hotel over there, and so forth. We got information from them that helped a lot.
Okay. Now, did you get to see any of the German prisoners as they came by?
Oh yeah, a lot of them, hundreds of them.
What did they look like? What condition were they in? How old were they?
Pretty draggled and discouraged because and a lot of them were poorly equipped because. Of course, Germany had been at war for a good amount of time now, and the soldiers weren't the best at that time.
And did you get a sense of how old they were?
Oh, they're all the way from kids 15 to all the way 45, 50 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody that could breathe was probably put in the German army.
Yeah, I mean, they had organized sort of infantry divisions to support the armor. And then those were recruited from these Volksgrenadier divisions, they called them.
Yeah.
And those would be the foot soldiers who get caught. I mean, the Panzer troops and the SS were somewhat better equipped and so forth, but they were mobile, so they were more likely to get out.
Yeah, the Germans tried to throw everything at us that they could at that time. In fact, they even had a lot of horse-drawn artillery.
Right.
I saw that a lot of the horses were shot and were laying on the side of the road.
Yeah, I mean, the Germans and the Russians both relied on horse-drawn transport for most of it. Americans and British were all in
It was
trucks.
mostly from the lack of gasoline. If you can't run, those tanks only go a couple miles on a gallon of gas.
Yeah. Well, the Germans always relied on horse-drawn stuff. So
Yeah.
that was through the war, except for the Panzer troops.
And their tanks were bigger and better than ours. Really, the Sherman tanks could not compete against these big German tanks. They had thicker armor.
Right, thicker armor, bigger guns, the whole thing. Now, did you have tanks attached to your division at the time you were there?
No, usually they would attach to the 84th, so I didn't know the numbers or whatever.
But you had some armor with you?
Oh yes, we always had armor.
Okay.
But the problem was in the Ardennes that it started to snow, and tanks going down the road with steel on snow, the tanks slid off the road very easily, and so the ditches were lined with just all kinds of mechanized material. They're just tanks. They could, well, you just can't move on ice and snow.
Right. Now, as you're basically then, does your division then kind of stay in continuous contact with the Germans then on a regular basis? And how long does that go on?
Well, of course, we got on the offensive probably about when we, on January 1st, when the skies cleared, we could, they send out just hundreds of aircraft, and they just bombed the daylights out of the Germans, and that was just about the end of it, because they lost all kinds of supplies, and every time these aircraft could see a column on the road, they just bomb them, and there was just nothing left of them. And so after January 1, things went downhill fast for the Germans.
Okay. And then were you pursuing them? Were you following them and going in the direction of Germany at that point?
Yeah, we would look little by little, but also the fact that there was closing the pinchers from the north and the south. So back by about the 15th of January, I think we were heading back to about where the border was.
Okay. And now, as you were moving forward, were you seeing a lot of destroyed German equipment and vehicles and things like that?
The roads were just clogged with the ditches, and you even seen dead soldiers, because sometimes they couldn't retrieve their soldiers, dead horses in the gutters, and yeah.
Now, what condition were the towns and the local communities in as you were moving forward?
Well, of course, there was just nothing left of most of the towns because of the tremendous artillery support that we had. That there was hardly a building standing. That was, I mean, mostly just a wall here and a wall there, and of course we were always in the basement with all kinds of the debris around.
Right. And basically, what was happening to the civilians at that point? Were they just trying to pick things up and put them back together again?
Well, a lot of them fled, but I would say maybe a fourth of them stayed in their home. But there was nothing left. If your home is bombed out and all there is a couple of walls, so they just moved on ahead of us. And the roads were clogged with Germans and German civilians, that is.
All right. Now you get back up sort of the original front line, close to the German border at that point, middle of January. At that point, does the division kind of stop and refit, or do you just keep going?
Well, after about the end of January, they said they took our division out and sent us back to where we were before, up on the northernmost American division.
Right.
So we were back to our own area where we first started back in November.
Okay. And then once you got there, how long was it before they started to send you forward again?
Well, because of the heavy defenses, we didn't. Maybe if we went 5 miles in a couple of weeks, we were doing very well. So it was very slow.
But you were still attacking at that point.
Yeah,
You weren't just
we were
holding the
attacking.
line.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you're getting back. It was like February then that you're back up there.
Probably March, somewhere, probably February, late February, somewhere. I'm not sure. It's hard to remember.
All right. Now, was there a point where you managed to actually get through the heavier fortifications and get past that into Germany, or what happened with you?
After we got somewhat through the Siegfried Line, then we had the Ruhr River, and of course, it's a fairly good river to start with, but the Germans controlled there was some gates that controlled the flooding, and dams, I guess you'd call them dams, and they opened up the dams and flooded that whole area, so that instead of a river maybe 50 yards across, it flooded just probably to a half a mile wide. And of course, we didn't have the resources that we probably had them, but we had to really wait for the water to go down before we could, because the water was really rushing through there.
All right. Now, we're getting into March at this point. You get Allies advancing in a lot of different places along the line. How long was it before you could kind of get? How long was it before the water kind of went down and you could move?
Well, it probably took us probably 3 weeks before we could do much. The water took probably that long to go down, and of course everything was so wet and soggy there that our mechanized outfits could not move in that kind of situation.
Yeah. So you just had dirt roads and flooded fields.
Yeah, and a lot of small towns. Most of those towns in that area, about every half mile you run into a small town.
And were the Germans still defending that area as you went into it?
Oh yeah, very heavily, because I almost got killed there. I was sitting in a Jeep one time at Pommern, and we had cleared that area, but evidently the Germans had occupied a hill that was about a quarter of a mile away, and they saw. I was sitting in a Jeep with another friend, another soldier, a buddy, and the Germans sent an 88 mortar. Screaming Mimi, they called them, when they saw this Jeep with 2 guys in it, and it hit right in the back of the Jeep, and it just raised the back end of the Jeep up, and of course when it hit, I could hear it coming in because it went over my head, and I ducked, and the windshield got blown out by shrapnel, and I had my rifle sitting right next to me, and I picked that up later on, and I had 6 shrapnel holes in. My buddy sitting right here got hit in the back with shrapnel, but when it hit, we ran for cover, and there was an archway about 50 or 60 feet away. We ran in there, and I ran through there, and I was looking for some other place for cover because I didn't know if any more shells would be coming in. I dove into I was kind of a lean-to with a straw in it, and I thought, I'll just dive in there. But the Germans happened to use it as an outhouse, so it was kind of a smelly affair. But anyway, I got up, and I make sure that I had my arms and legs, that there was nothing. And I went back to see where my buddy was, and he was laying in the archway. He had been hit, and blood coming out of his mouth and his nose, and I knew that he would die. I called for medics, but he didn't. He passed away right there.
Then At that point now, are you kind of moving along a little bit more quickly?
Yeah,
or-
once we got over the Ruhr River, which was probably in early March, I would guess, then of course the German defenses were breaking down fast, and they had still groups here and there would give us a lot of trouble, and we had to clean them out, especially in these small villages where they would occupy certain areas, and you had to kind of get them out of every. And sometimes in church steeples, they'd get up on the top of that and they could shoot down at us. But
right. Okay. Now, what did Germany look like to you once you got in there? Was it any different from Belgium or the Netherlands? Or?
Well, of course, Germany was really beat up. I mean, our artillery just demolished the place. Every town was just nothing standing but a few walls here and there, and that's why we had to go to basements for our switchboard, because that was the only safe place.
Now, did you get eventually into more developed or built-up areas, or were you kind of still in open countryside?
Well, it was mostly farming area and through there that we would go through. But once we got, of course, after we got through the Ruhr River, and then our next objective was the Rhine River, which probably 50, 60 miles between the two of them. But at that time, we were moving 4 or 5 miles every day. And when we got to the Rhine, of course, that was another big river to get past.
Yeah. Now, when you got there, were there British or American forces already across it at that point?
Oh yeah, of course, they had made bridgeheads across, and in fact, I think there were a couple of bridges that were intact. Because a river that size, it takes a lot of the engineers got to put a pretty good sized bridge across in order to have our mechanized equipment go over it.
And then how did you get across the Rhine? Did they ferry you, or did you take a bridge? Or?
Oh, at that time there was a bridge, it was, as I recall, that is.
Yeah. Okay. And then once you got across the Rhine, then what did your unit do?
Well, then we headed up toward Hanover, which is a city of about 450,000. It's a big city up there. And we, of course, there was not much resistance there, because there was a lot of Polish people working that city, and of course, when they found that the GIs, the Americans, were coming, they were all for us. They paved the way for us quite easily, because they knew that they would be free and had.
What could they do for you?
Well, I don't know what they were doing. They probably did some sabotage and so forth, help in that way. But just when we come into the city, they were waving flags and saying, "Hey, welcome, Americans," and we couldn't understand them. But in fact, I remember when we were going down to the Battle of the Bulge too. We go through these small Belgian towns, and the people would stand on their steps and wave American flags, and the kids would, they wanted chewing gum and candy bars, and they could not say chewing gum, but the best they could say was kaugummi. That's all I could hear as we go through these towns, but we knew what they wanted, chewing gum.
Now, were you at Hanover at the point when the Germans surrendered, or did you go on?
Well, it was pretty much, they were retreating so fast, their army was so disorganized, they had no structure at all left, and so it was just a matter of time before we got to the Elbe River.
Okay, so you got, and were you at the Elbe when the Germans surrendered finally?
Well, no, we got to the Elbe River. The Germans were still about 15 miles away. They had gone through Berlin, and there's probably another 30 or 40 miles between Berlin and the Elbe River. Now, we could have easily gotten to Berlin first, but President Roosevelt had made a decision with Stalin that they would take Berlin, and that we would go no further than the Elbe. So we waited 3, 4, 5 days for the Russians to get to the Elbe River.
Okay. Now, did you see anything of the Russians?
Oh yeah, they came over. Mostly the officers. I don't think too many enlisted guys, but they wanted to celebrate with schnapps and vodka and whatever. There was drinking, parties.
And were you part of that, or was just the officers doing
No,
that? You guys watching?
No, mostly the officers. The enlisted men didn't get too much of that, but we would see these Germans. We'd just say hi to them. So.
Okay. What do the Russians look like?
Well, they look pretty good, considering the fact that they'd been at war for 3, 4, 5 years. Of course, the officers always look much better than the enlisted men.
Okay.
But so the German population did not want to surrender to the Russians. So as the Russians were moving toward the Elbe River, there was thousands and thousands of German citizens that said we'll never want to get controlled by the Russians. So they fled to the Elbe River, and they tried to get over the Elbe River by any means possible, boats or whatever. Someone tried to swim over, the current was too fast, and a lot of them just drowned because they couldn't make it.
Did your unit provide any assistance to them, or at least
No,
banks, or you just watched them?
no, we just, it was not our duty to do it. But the Germans came over by the thousands in our sector.
Now, once the Germans finally do surrender, and you've got the Russians and so forth, what does your division do at that point?
Well, of course, we were going to be the Army of Occupation, so they just kind of shifted us around. I think I stayed by the Elbe River only about a week or two, and then our particular unit was sent to, I probably went to 7 or 8 different towns after that.
And what kind of duties or responsibilities did you have at that point?
Not a great deal, because our switchboard didn't have to function. It was just Army of Occupation, it was control, make sure that everything. But yeah, wasn't much to do after that.
Okay, now, how were the German citizens sort of behaving after the surrender? Did you see much of them, or have much of an idea what was going on with them?
I'm not sure. We didn't. There was a order out that you did not fraternize with any Germans at all.
Well, in some places that was lifted after the Germans surrendered. It was pretty consistent before that. You couldn't have anything to do with them.
But even after that,
okay.
they kind of didn't want, although it didn't have much effect.
Now, do you remember any particular places that you visited or things that you saw while you were still there in Germany?
Oh, boy. I can't recall anything specific that as far as, no,
They were just moving you around from place to place?
Yeah, just, and I know one place that we came to, a small town that our commanding officers that the Germans had to surrender all their guns and swords and so forth and bring them to the town square. And there was a pile of swords and guns there, and we helped ourselves to them. I sent home 4, 5, 6 swords and a couple of guns, and yeah, booties of war.
Now, did that stuff actually make it home?
Oh yeah, still got them.
Now, about how long did you then stay in Germany at that point?
Well, I guess I had quite a few. After the war, they said, well, the GIs could probably go home soon. And they had a point system, and I think if you had at least 80 points, I'm not sure how they calculated the points, but I think I ended up with 82 or 84 points, so I was eligible to go home rather soon.
Okay.
So they sent me, they had these various camps, and a lot of them in France, that you would go there, and then from there they would go to a port of debarkation, as you could call it. And
had there been any concern that you would have to go to Japan? Or
well, there was some, and we didn't really know. We thought, well, maybe we'll have to go back to the United States, and then probably at that point they'd determine who went to Japan.
But in your case, at least, you were far enough along in points that you weren't just sitting around in Germany waiting for someone to send you somewhere.
No, from these camps in France, and we were sent down. In fact, I was attached no longer to the 84th. I was with the 141st Field Artillery, so I didn't know any of these guys. But anyway, we were sent to the middle of France, and then from there we were sent down to Marche on the Mediterranean Sea. But when we went down there, they put us in these French railroad cars left over from World War I. They called them 40 and 8 cars. They got the name because the French used to put 40 guys and 8 horses in a railroad car. And
they're basically just boxcars then?
Just boxcars with floor. All we had on the floor was about 6 inches of straw. No toilets, no nothing.
Right.
And we were on one of those for almost 24 hours. and that was not very good.
Right. Now, they keep you at Marseille very long, or were they loading you onto ships?
Well, there was a lot of confusion there. They decided at one time that the 141st Field Artillery was going to, there was a ship called the Joseph Hooker that was over in the United States, and whether they had to be fitted for to be able to transport troops or not,
Mm-hmm.
I think that they had to build some some tables and some bunk beds and. Anyway, they said the 141st is going to wait for the Joseph Hooker. But meantime, a lot of these guys would come into these ports of debarkation, be there a couple of days, and they'd get on the ship, and away we go. And for some reason, week after week, we were sat there, and we got so mad because nothing happened to us. They said, well, you're going to be on the Joseph Hooker. And the Joseph Hooker picked up some wheat somewhere, and it was delivered that to North Africa, and they were about a month and a half late. And they said, well, maybe we better go to Marseille and pick these guys up, but we don't have any ballast. They was going to go to Greece to get some rock material for ballast. They said, we're so late, we'll skip the ballast. So they pulled into port, and we got on board, 600 of us, and started out for the U.S. They said, because we don't have any ballast, we'll go the southern route where we won't hit any storms. So we went through the Mediterranean Sea and through the Straits of Gibraltar, and about a day later, some GI got acute appendicitis, and they said, well, he's in bad shape. So they radioed, who can help us? And there was a U.S. ship that had a doctor on about 600, maybe 600 miles north. And they said, well, we're not going to come down to you. You got to come up to us. So away we turned strictly, instead of going toward the west, we went north. Dropped the kid off, and then we were in the North Atlantic shipping lanes. And without ballast, and about the next day or two, we hit a tremendous storm. And the fact that when you're without ballast, your ship rides too high in the water, and these waves were 25, 30 feet high. The front and the back of the ship would be under one of these swells, nothing in the middle, so pretty quick the river started breaking in the middle. We'd start taking on water, and the water came in the first hold, and they couldn't pump it out. So one day they said, well, things are not going well at all. So they sent out an SOS. We're in bad shape. So, but the fact that we were about 2,000 miles from the U.S., they heard a signal that said, there's a ship out there somewhere that's sending out SOS, but we don't know their location, nor do we know their name. So we were struggling. Water filled up the second hold, and the announcement came over the loudspeaker that said, be prepared to jump overboard at any time. Great news. Here I'd spent 6 or 7 months in the front line and survived then. I thought, this is not good at all. And I thought, I'd done a lot of praying, because when they say, be prepared to jump overboard, they said you'd last maybe 45 or 50 seconds to maybe a minute in that cold water. But about that time also, 2 destroyers came on each side of us, but they were probably, maybe 400 or 500 yards off on each side. But they said you'd be swept past those things so fast that you had never had a chance. But we did manage to stay afloat, and
Did anybody ship come to assist you, or did you just kind of keep moving?
Well, we just kept moving, because in one 24-hour period, I think we only went forward about 15 miles, just a couple miles an hour. We should have been making 11 or 12 miles an hour.
Right. And so basically the ship just limps into
we
port
limped well. Meanwhile, we had nothing to eat, because everybody on board was seasick. I mean, the floors were slick with upchuck, and we had nothing to eat for a couple of days because the cooks were too sick, and the ship was rolling too much too. So but it was very primitive. We had to stand up to tables. We couldn't sit down. I mean, it was that ship. Liberty ships are not made to transport people, and
Right.
that's what they did for us.
Yeah, well, it's kind of not the best way to
No.
end that particular
No.
tour. So then, did you go into New York, or where did you land?
Well, we finally made it to New York. They said that we were listing 6 or 7 degrees, and we had 25 feet of water in the holes in the boat.
Wow. Well, you had ballast then.
We had plenty of ballast. That's for sure.
Okay. So now, what do they do with you once you actually get into New York?
Well, each one had a barracks bag, and of course we disembarked, and we got on trains, which I decided, I thought, well, the experience that I went through, I would have kissed that ground, because, I mean, after what we went through, it was just unbelievable. It was just a miracle that we ever made it.
Right.
Because if that ship had sunk, it would have been one of the big disasters of the war, and we came so close that. Yeah, we had heavy barracks bags when we got on trains, and everybody went to their the various places of the country to.
So did you go back to Camp McCoy, or did you go to Custer?
No, I went to Camp Atterbury in Indiana, and that was one of the places where they
Discharge people.
discharge you.
So when did you finally get home?
Well, I got home December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. Of course, when I was down in Louisiana, my wife came down there one time to live with me, and she had a surprise for me. She says, "I'm pregnant." And so I hadn't seen our boy when I got home. He was a year old. And so I pulled into Union Station in December 23, 1945, and I saw my son for the first time.
Right. Now, once you're there and you're back home, how long was it before you went back to work?
Well, probably just a couple of weeks, because I lived with her parents because there was nothing available. All the soldiers coming back home, there was just nothing available,
Right.
especially if you had a child. They want somebody to rent some upstairs place to you with the kids running around. So we lived there with her folks for quite a while.
Okay. And what kind of work did you start doing then?
Well, a friend of mine got a job for me at Keeler Brass. They make furniture handles and that sort of stuff. But I'd done that for only about 3 or 4 months, and then my dad knew a friend of his was in the printing trade, and he was a manager, superintendent of a printing company, and he said, "Would you like to learn the printing trade?" And I said, "Yeah, I gotta learn the trade." So I worked nights, 10 hours a night, Wheeler Van Label Company, and we made labels. And I got involved in printing, and I changed jobs 2, 3, 4 times, and finally I worked at a place called Turnwall Palmer Printing Company, and after 23 years, the owner wanted to retire. He said, "You want to be a partner?" I said, "I'll buy your share." So I was a partner in the printing company for quite a few years, and then the partnership didn't work as good as it was supposed to. So the board of directors said, "Let's disassemble this whole thing." And so at that point, I got a job at Foremost Insurance Company as printing manager.
All right. To look back at the whole thing now, how do you think your time in the service wound up affecting you, either just what kind of person you are or how you view the world?
Well,
or anything else?
of course, I guess you learn discipline in the Army. I mean, that's the one thing. If you don't have discipline, I mean, you can't fight the Army. It's just too big and too powerful. If you do, you get the consequences are bad. So discipline is one of the big things, and cooperation. Without cooperation and discipline in the Army, that's why you win battles.
Are there any other kind of memories out of your time in the service that sort of stick with you or come back to you that you haven't mentioned here yet?
No, I guess the fact that I was constantly under fire, every night when you're near the front lines, the big artillery shells are going over your head, and it's always danger there. And you know, even though we were in the basement, if a shell hit close to that particular house, it would you'd get blown up.
Well, did sort of the headquarters or rear area units take a lot of casualties, or?
Not a great deal, because most of the casualties were in the front
Right.
in the front lines. Most of these are ASTP guys that were put in the infantry. Probably 80%. Well, maybe not quite that high, but either they were close to it. They were either injured or were killed or missing in action or frozen feet. I mean, the casualty rate in the front line is just tremendous.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very fortunate. I was very, very blessed to be put as a switchboard operator. I was usually somewhere about a quarter of a mile back of the front line.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
I
I'll
don't
take a quick picture of just this view. Just if you just look at James, if you would. And
Yeah, there you go. Your publicity shot.
yeah.
Now, basically, what happens with this stuff now is we will get we'll get you a DVD copy of the interview, so you have that. You can give that to your family or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get a copy of it, and we archive that at the library out at Grand Valley State.
Mm-hmm.
And we've now got a collection of about 1,000 interviews that
Mm-hmm.
we're processing. But I've done a bunch, and we have other partners who've done them and that kind of thing. And we have students who watch all of these, and they make detailed notes on them, and those go up on the internet so that researchers will be able to look up individual stories. So they can look up, 84th Division or Battle of the Bulge or something like that, and your story would be up. They could find that and see what's in it and whether or not they want to view the whole video. In the long run, these will also be available as streaming video over the internet. And the idea is then that sometime in the very distant future, people can still watch and talk.
Well.
And we also send information on the interview into the Library of Congress so that you go into their database too. And so people who are going there and wanting to find individual stories get to find yours.
So it took a little over an hour then. No, he's still taking pictures.
One last one.
One last bit.
Great. Thank you.
Well, I hope it helped you a little bit. I
Oh,
don't-
yeah.
I don't know.
I always learn things. There's always stuff that I didn't know. And